Bueno, buenas.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome everyone. This afternoon we'll have a great person here that was born in Providence, Rhode Island in 1945. She's had a very interesting life with very special experiences and professional experiences, mostly in journalism and audiovisual production. She's well known for her work at the beginning of the 1970s in the Rolling Stone magazine, and during the following 3 decades for her work with her husband Mitchell Burgess as a screenwriter and producer at The Sopranos and then Blue Bloods, a series with 13 seasons. She's discussing this in her book The Only Girl, which is published by Liburuak, and at the end of this session she'll be signing your books. In the hall you can get the book and get it signed by her. She's lived, as we usually say, many lives, and about these lives we'll be speaking during the following hour. As always in this forum, we'll have a Q&A session that for the questions that mostly you'll have for her at the end. So I ask you for an applause for Robin Green.
May I speak? Lo siento, no hablo español. ¿Sí? Buena suerte. But this is English translation in my ear, okay? So that's what we'll do, right? Yeah.
Eso vamos a hacer.
Okay, but it happens at the same time, simultaneously. Okay.
Yep, it will work.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to start the conversation speaking about journalism and about something you describe in your book. In your book, you write, page 19, pretty much every story I wrote from then on, at the very least, stung my subjects and at the most cost them their careers or landed them in prison. So today in 2024, journalists, what we do, we take selfies with the interviewees, and journalism, cultural journalism especially, is something which is doesn't want to bother anyone. So I'd like to ask you how you see today's journalism compared to that pioneering journalism that you were in the 1970s.
Yes, well, I think probably journalism today has me somewhat to blame for that, for their strictures today. Then there was a great deal more access. People were innocent, they were hungry for publicity, and they didn't really see harm coming. Not all of my articles were harmful. For instance, with Marvel Comics, I was very generous and loving, but I did tell things as I saw them, and often it was to the detriment of the subject. And I think that's made, the tide was beginning to change even then. Ellen Barkin, I remember, was extremely guarded. She was an actress, and she saw me coming, and she was extremely guarded. So I think now probably celebrity journalism is more publicity marketing tool. Unfortunately, I don't think people want to or need to bare their souls in quite the way they did then. And it was also hip, because it was Rolling Stone. People weren't afraid, to show themselves.
Justamente
Well, actually, for Rolling Stone, you wrote one of your best-known pieces, and I think which is the one you are proud of, you're most proud of, which is the profile of Dennis Hopper, which is considered one of the 10 interviews that shocked Hollywood. So please tell us about that adventure with Dennis Hopper.
Yeah, that really put me on the map, Poor thing. But I went down to New Mexico. I didn't know what to expect. And it was my first trip away, sent by Rolling Stone on this press junket to interview, to see a movie that had been made about Dennis Hopper in the desert where he lived. I went with Annie Leibovitz, who was just starting as a photographer then. We started at the same time, I guess it was 1971. And I just went in with no preparation except for having seen Easy Rider, I suppose, and a bit of hero worship, you know. It was a movie star and whatnot. But what I found was kind of a Hollywood in New Mexico, a very druggy, very distasteful, and ultimately, as the evening went on, the day went on, cruel. And he behaved so badly to someone at the junket. And I had everything on a tape recorder, which when I'm nervous, I would tape record. I learned then to do that, because then I would transcribe the tape and there would be the meat of the article, and no one could say it wasn't true, although we didn't fact check them either. It was a lot of freedom in that regard. But he just acted like such a pig, and he was so loaded, and the movie was so boring that he made, and he was so pompous, and then I ran out into the desert because he was cruel to someone we were all around watching me do my first ever interview with Dennis Hopper on the floor of his living room on the carpet. And he was so cruel to someone, and I thought, he's going to turn on me next. And so I ran out into the night. Does this answer your question at all? You're looking at me like, what is she talking about? But I ran out into the night, which was stupid because it was in the middle of the desert. But Kit Carson, who was one of the filmmakers, came out and drove me home. And I published the story just as I'd seen it. And it was, I think, the second article in Rolling Stone. The first one I wrote was a cover, but it didn't. I was going to say it didn't air right away, but that's television. It wasn't printed right away. So it put me on the map with the 10, most scandalous, whatever it was. But also that Joan Didion had Kit, who had driven me home, call me at my house in Berkeley to tell me that she liked the article. And for me, that was the top, because I worshipped her and her writing. She was a woman who was writing in her own voice as a woman, a female voice. I guess because it was her voice, it was a female voice, but so individual, and I admired her. She was one of the reasons that I saw that I could maybe do this.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In 1971, when you joined Rolling Stone, and I quote your book, page 104, everybody I learned much later was sleeping with everybody. Editorial assistants with editors, editors with interview subjects, and reps with celebrities, and everybody in the art department with each other. So I want to ask you, what differences do you see between that time of free love with the arrival of the pill, of the contraceptive pill, and the current times, which are free, but there's an anxious time? Do you think that it's a similar time, or it's a quite different time? Do we have the same joy for living that you had at that time?
Same. The same what? I'm sorry, the joy?
The joy for life.
I don't know. You'd have to ask someone who's 25. My sense of it is, first of all, yes, the pill happened, and I was the first girl at the clinic at Pembroke, Brown, to get one. I thought it was just great to have that decision. And also it was a time of women feeling that why not just be just like men who were experiencing this kind of Hugh Hefner freedom? Why shouldn't we have the same freedom? So there was that going on. And the music and just the whole ethos, and it was just a freer time. And then AIDS happened, and a lot of fun stopped then. But also it got old. There was no real substance to it. There was no it was fun, but, then what or something. So it kind of devolved, I think, a little bit, even at the time. The 60s ended, and the dream of the 60s kind of petered out a little bit. God, this is depressing. But, COVID, I don't know, hey kids, are you having as much fun as we had? You don't have our music, but you have your own music. My sense though is that no, it's not as free. I think there's just so much stuff to worry about. We had plenty to worry about. I guess we worried about the war and the bomb, but this is, things, there's still plenty to worry about. I think it's not as joyous a time. I don't think so. It was great to be young then. There was a we had strength. We felt that we could, and Rolling Stone was part of that. It was a voice of youth,
Vuelvo a...
Well, again, on the book, you write, many of the editors and writers, males, every last one of them, had been drafted from online newspapers. Most left wives and families behind, at least for a time. Then it was like if they were set loose in the epicenter of the countercultural sexual revolution. They were the girls of Rolling Stone that were in the redaction and art departments. They were there all the time, helping to putting out a magazine and also doing their filing, fetching their coffee, and fucking their brains out. So my question is, how would have been Rolling Stone if you could have, or if women could have made that magazine instead of these all-liners? Maybe you would have shown other artists like Debbie Harris, more Debbie Harris and less Bruce Springsteen. So there are several questions in one.
Rolling Stone was 90% male readership, 10% female readership. That's pretty much the end of the story. That's why I was the only girl, because that reflects, those numbers exactly reflect to my existence on that masthead among those 10 men, or whatever, 9, or whatever it was. Women did take over the magazine in terms of managing editor, blah, 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 but it didn't change. I don't feel that the magazine, I never felt the magazine shied. We had Janice on the cover, we had Tina on the cover. I just don't think that's valid.
Okay.
It doesn't strike me as valid. I don't think it was purposely done. I will say that, the name of the game is always selling magazines. You look at what works on the newsstand, but I don't... And maybe that reflects, maybe those, 10%, 90% does reflect in content. But these are practical matters and have to be, unless the readership changed, nothing else was going to change. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's my answer. Damn it.
Okay.
No, I think the magazine and Jan was very open to all kinds of music. He does have a star fucking thing about men. He does. Obviously, in light of all the problems that he had with talking too much. He talks too much. He talked too much. But I think basically what you saw in the magazine was a reflection of what was the reality then.
Okay.
Well, I read the last paragraph of the book, page 107, 108. We like to smoke dope and get high and listen to music. This is us, a feminine us. We like to smoke dope and get high and listen to music. We like to dance to it. We like to get sweaty. We were game and adventurous. We enjoyed being desired, and we were up for it. And we had the pill. We were liberated. from our parents at least, and in society, if not in the workplace. We didn't see ourselves as victims. We were proactive in our sex lives. We were hungry for experience and beat men to it. If it was okay for men to fuck around, why shouldn't we?
That language, that's terrible.
Le quería preguntar cómo impactó.
I wanted to ask you, what was the impact of AIDS on your generation, which actually you have already explained, but before she told me about the victimism on the female side of society, so I wanted to explain about that.
I'm not a big fan of the narrative of the victimization of women. I know that it happens. I know that men have taken advantage of their positions of power and been bad. But I think overall that there was something in the agency that we felt then, that we were proactive, that we weren't. We didn't see ourselves as, but I don't think anyone got taken advantage of. I think it was mutual. I do think that. I can't remember an instance where someone had to perform something they didn't want to do at all, or to get ahead, you know. It wasn't a quid pro quo kind of situation at all that I saw. Maybe I'm obtuse, but I don't think so. I don't think it was happening. I think in New York things are a little more tamped down, and there is more stricture, and there's more to be said about women taking positions of power and stuff. But then, women, as I said, women did, rise in the magazine after I left. The two weren't, related, but, and it didn't change the magazine at all, I don't think. I don't even think in terms of the stories that were done. Although, once I left. It's very much my MO.
Okay. Dos de sus artículos.
Hearing this in English or what? When I talk.
No, they listen in Spanish. No.
Are you listening in?
They're listening.
Yeah?
They can choose to listen to you in English or in Spanish.
Hablando en inglés.
Confusing? No? It's interesting.
¿Todo va bien?
Again, lo siento.
Everything looks okay.
Okay, just asking.
Muy bien. Dos de sus artículos.
Well, two of your best-known articles actually were never written. The first one is a story on Robert Kennedy Jr. that became a story with Robert Kennedy Jr. At the moment when you had a meeting in his bed, in his waterbed. I want to ask you what went down then, and also about the limits of journalism then and now.
And now that asshole is running for president, okay? I mean, it's just unbelievable. And no one has asked me about it. I guess the readership of my book is not, I don't know what's going on with that. And it was a real non-event. I mean, I was sent to interview the children of Robert Kennedy Jr., all of them. Jan had a huge consuming, he was a real star fucker. That's Jan Weiner, the editor. And he had an interest in the Kennedys. Had I written the article, he wouldn't have been later in New York been able to be friends with the Kennedys, because basically I was a muckraker and I would have published stuff about them that was unsavory or unkind. And that was part of the reason I didn't want to do the story, even though it would have made me famous at the time. It would have hit the news, especially if I said that I slept with Robert Kennedy Jr. and that he had a big dick, That would have been like big, But I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I just couldn't. I told myself at the time, well, first of all, I didn't want to admit what I had done, which was very, I met him on the campus of Harvard. I went with him to score Dilaudid on the street from a vendor, which is a real heavy-duty downer. And he had plenty to want to have a downer about. A lot of tragedy in that family. He had just lost his father, but and we went back to his dorm room. Probably. I don't think he was underage. I think I went back and checked that out. It's like I wanted to know what would happen. But when I wrote the book, but he had a waterbed. He had a little statue of his father. He had falconry equipment on the wall. These details were very important to me, and that was the story. The story was in that room. There wasn't much of a story. I only interviewed the older children, and there wasn't much of a story with them. There were just not much to say there, but there was something about him that I felt I wanted to know, and I think I achieved that by spending the night. He was very take charge. I guess he was loaded, and maybe that's why his appendage was so big. But so I just felt that I had learned something about the Kennedys that might account for their sureness and cockiness. I felt that was nuts, but I didn't feel comfortable publishing the piece and writing the piece, and ultimately, Jan and I were in Israel as it happened, just by accident, and we were in a nightclub, and he asked me if I'd already spent a little money on expenses, if he was going to get the story, and I said no. And he said, well, I'm going to have to, I still worked for the magazine after that, but he said, I'm going to have to take you off the masthead. And I didn't care. I was 28 years old. I just didn't care. I was done with it. Whatever it was, I had done it. And I never set out to do it. I liked it, but I just was happy to stop it. I did a little more journalism after that, and for them. But then I went just back to school. I went back to the university where I had felt safe because I was too alone at that point in my life, and I wanted to start again. And that's a good place to start. I recommend it. That's advice I can give. Just somebody wanted advice earlier, and I said I really can't give advice, but I can tell people to go back to school.
Antes de volver a estudiar...
Before you went back to college, there was another article you didn't write, but it became famous. The magazine We, that was competing for the market of Playboy, sent you to Israel and told you you can write about what you want. And then you didn't write that article on Israel. And I want to ask you why, what happened there, and also what would you write today about Israel in 2024?
Israel is way too complicated for me. I'm heartbroken all around. I just don't see what can happen. I wish that what was happening would stop, and I wish those poor people, I'm sure everyone feels all of this complication. I'm not in government. I don't have to make these decisions, and I don't want to answer this question. It's too much for me. And the subject even then was too big for me. Although I really did, I was 1974, an editor in Chicago said Robin Green in Israel. I had no idea what that meant, but I was like, cool, I'll go to Israel. It was, it gave me money to go, and I had time. I could stretch money really far then. And frankly, you already know everything. So a man I slept with, he was in the war. I guess there had been a war right before, 74 war, and he had one leg, he had a stump. So I was curious about that. I'm not, a kind of icky story, but I learned a lot about the war from him. I learned a lot about Israel from a day that I spent walking and talking with a young Arab man. Basically I went back home and to the States, and the editor had been fired that sent me. And I said, great, that was that. I don't have to do it. And then I said to the new editor, what was the assignment anyway? It was kind of amorphous. And he said, why don't you write about sex with Israeli men? Did you get laid over there? Why don't you write about sex with Israeli men? And I, of all people, was offended. It's like, what do you mean? I'm not going to write. I just didn't want to do it. And so I didn't do it. And, the situation passed. There was nothing terrible happened. And it hasn't even come up much except with you right now. So.
Okay. Joan Didion,
a writer you really like, said that writers always sell someone out. Do you agree?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
My husband isn't happy with this book, not because of things I said about him, and I think that's what she was talking about. Don't trust a writer, because they'll screw you, But that's, I think, what a writer, that's the material, that's your material. And so your interactions, you sell your interactions, I suppose, and I suppose if you sell them in a certain way, someone could feel sold out. Boy, am I squirreling around this question. But I don't know, it's so interesting. Do you know what she meant by that?
Creo que...
Well, I think just what you just said, that a writer will do what he or she needs to do to tell the story, and that means many times that he might need to screw someone.
It just occurred to me, Joan Didion is a very fine writer, obviously, but she wrote a book and didn't tell the truth about her daughter. So she drew the line there. I know, because I know the family now, and I know a lot of it, and so she refused to sell her daughter out. Yeah, so I guess she was just bullshitting.
Muy bien. Les voy a decir una serie de nombres.
Well, I'll tell you several names, and please tell me something about them. Hunter Thompson.
Consumed by the myth that he had created about him. I only saw him be genuine once. Usually he was just a big put-on, an act. But it was a great act, is the thing. And the stuff he wrote, it's still today. It's like music. It's so passionate and whole cloth that he really had this great persona. And he lived that way, except that I saw him turn it off with Studs Terkel in Chicago. Studs Terkel is this kind of venerated radio journalist, I think. And it was a radio station in Chicago, and we were all there for some reason. And Hunter, all the way there in the car, he was complaining about like bugs crawling up his legs, the bullshit about the drugs and stuff. And then we get there, and he drops it and is so respectful to Studs Terkel that I understood he was older than us, most of us at the magazine, and it was a certain lack of respect that he really didn't have to be genuine or real with us, and maybe he protected himself also. I also think that he met a kind of tragic end, consumed by his myth. I think it was on the phone with his wife when he killed himself, shot himself in the mouth. You know, it's not very nice.
Muy bien. Annie Leibovitz.
Annie Leibovitz?
Yeah. I spoke to her during the book. You know, I wanted to use a story about her and Jerry Garcia, and she made me change it. She said, you made me sound like I was stalking him. She said, so I did change it out of respect for her, but we didn't, you know, she really sailed with that profession and her photography. She was just like made something in France, some huge award in France. So we left, we parted, and she also, at a time, the time that I left, people were getting very heavy into drugs, and I just not that person, and I didn't like it, and so I didn't go that way. I didn't stay in it, and she stayed in it, and then she got out of it, and saved herself, I suppose. Is that what you wanted to know, or did you really want to know something interesting?
Nothing, just surprise us.
Well, that's what I have to say about her. And I could say something else, but I'm saving it for my next book. I'm sorry. But she had an impact on me.
Lo leeremos en su próximo libro.
Pardon me?
Then we'll read it in your next book.
And I will tell about just a small thing, but something impactful that happened between us.
Okay.
Not a great mystery, but I'll talk about her later.
Stan Lee.
Stan Lee?
A square, really square guy. Simple, really. Just ebullient. Spoke, happy man. His wife and daughter kept aloof from what he did. It had no respect then, Marvel Comics. It wasn't what it became. It wasn't this behemoth that it ate Hollywood. And I don't even think he benefited financially as much as he should have from that whole situation. He ended his life in Malibu or somewhere, kind of addled and fucked over and taken advantage of by various forces. But just a lovely man, and not much to say about him. Nice boss, nice about me. I quit my job there with no week's notice. I'd gone to Chicago, and I called him up and I said, I'm not coming back. I was his secretary. I said, I'm not coming back. I got hung up. And he said, you got hung up? What does that mean? And I said, I'm not coming back. And so I went on with my life, and I went to California. But he, when I came back to do the article about him for Rolling Stone, all was forgiven. He was sweet as could be, and happy to see me, and glad for my success. He was just a lovely man.
Creo que se ha entendido, pero ella...
Well, she was secretary for Stan Lee. That was her first job before joining Rolling Stone. And when he went to Rolling Stone, her first article was an interview with Stan Lee and an article on Marvel. Timothy Leary.
Did I meet him? No. I lived in his garage. He was in Algeria. He had fled prison in California and gone to Algeria, and his kids were really. I think the boy Jackie was okay. Susan, the girl, I think she ended up killing herself, but they had no money. He left them with his house in the Berkeley Hills, and I had no home at that point. So I lived in their fixed-up garage, and that was my contact with him. Except that years later, in Hollywood, we were asked to write a movie about him, but we never did it. But I researched him a lot, so I know a lot about him. And I took LSD a little, some. Oh, yeah. So, yeah. So I don't have a lot to say about him.
John Updike.
John Updike?
I didn't meet either. But when I wrote my first TV script, I wrote it here in Spain, actually. I had a chance to write, the people who created Northern Exposure, or Doctor in Alaska, they had created a show before that called Year in the Life. And John, I'd gone to school with him at Iowa when I went back to school in '75. And he remembered my short stories and thought I would be good to write for the show. So I was doing an article, I was writing about food then, and I was doing an article on a food convention, I think here in Madrid, and I flew to Barcelona and I took the train to Sitges, and this was in the 80s, and there was nothing there. It was beautiful, but empty and deserted in a way. And I stayed in a hotel, having this romantic idea about being a writer at a hotel. What is it, Graham Greene or something? I don't know. And but I was lonely. It was hard to even eat by myself. And now I'm fairly independent, but then I don't know what I was thinking. I wrote the script, I handed it in back in LA, and they said it was terrible. And I thought, well, okay, that was a nice fantasy. But then they said, John said, I think you can do this. We don't want you to write in the style of television. I was giving them what I thought was a television show. They said, we want subtext, and we wanted in the style of humor, or we want humor, and we want it in the style of John Updike. And that was my connection to Updike because, of course, I was a literature major and I knew who Updike was and I'd read him so I could deliver. And I went to my job. I was an editor of a magazine in California, then in LA, called California Magazine, working for Harold Hayes, which was like, he's a very famous editor. And although he had been fired at that point. But so I went on the weekend and I rewrote the script. And it was a home run. Do you know what I mean? And so I FedExed it because we had no email. You had to type everything, with like carbon paper. There were copies and stuff. It was really primitive, but it slowed you down in an interesting way. But so I FedExed the stuff over to Universal Studios, and I got a phone call immediately. In Hollywood, good news travels fast. Bad news takes forever because nobody wants to bum you out, really, unless they're a sadist, But so, but that was it, And then I worked ever since. I just kept getting one job after another, and I loved it. I loved it more than journalism because. Am I talking too much? I'm sorry. But this is, to me, I loved it because it wasn't just your mind. You got to express your feelings and be dramatic. And I really loved that aspect to that work. I really found it very completing. So I loved it for a very long time.
Muy bien. ¿Y un último nombre?
One last name, James Gandolfini.
Has anybody ever cried in an interview? I loved him. He was a lively fellow, very handsome, very attractive, very kind. Very guilty about his success, very kinky, I understand, in his predilections, or to me anyway, it sounded that way. Mitch would hang out with my husband because I couldn't go the places where he went. Because when Mitch would hang with him, Mitch would come in at 3:00 in the morning at a tilt. You know what I mean? They would drink too much. And it would have been not good for me to be alone with James, but it was the saddest. It was actually a time, it wasn't my first death, but it was the first time I actually lost my knees. Do you know what I mean? When I went out to tell Mitch, when it came up on my iPad, that he had died, it was just terrible, terrible loss for everyone. But he was great on the set. He was tortured, very exacting of himself. He got better at it, but he used to abuse himself physically to get to feel pain. You know, he'd hit concrete and stuff, like weird shit. And so, you know, he had a lot of demons too, but who doesn't? I think we should end there. No, you end. I'm sorry.
Bueno.
Well, now we have gone to the point where we will discuss your screenwriting side. You leave in 75, you leave journalism, you start working for TV. 11 years later, in 86, how was that transition from one world to the other? You went to Iowa to join the creative writing program. So how was that transition?
I went to Iowa. It's a great place for a writer. It's context and also people to read your stuff, and every writer came through. You know, so you would meet everyone, Borges, Anthony Burgess, you know, just like amazing stuff, everyone. And I met my husband. He was just out of the Vietnam Army. It was 1975 or 6 when I met him. And he was my student. I was teaching a class in my second year and getting my master's. And he walks in as man, which was all I needed because I'd never taught before. And you know, he was a grown-up, and they were all kids, so I could kind of handle that. But at the end of the semester, we got together. I didn't touch him during class, you know, or anything like that. But he was a really good writer, really, really good, and with an individual voice. It's, you know. So anyway, we got a $200 car. He graduated from college on the GI Bill. We got a $200 car, Chevy, drove over the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, into LA, and we had nothing. We had, I think, $1,300, and nobody asked us to come there. And we got temporary secretary jobs. We had to work. We had no money, and so we worked for a couple of years, just doing this and that. And I didn't waitress again, though. I stopped that, but it was mostly clerical work. And then I started writing again and working at a magazine again, and we split up at that point. And then I did a lot of magazine work and writing restaurant reviews, and it was one of those restaurant, because I was funny. I don't know if you can tell, but I can be funny. But so I would have a little humor in the restaurant reviews, and just a little. And John, who I'd met, John Falsey, I'd met him in Iowa. He was in my class. I defended his short story, thank God. And he read my restaurant review and showed it to Josh Brand and said she could write for us. And so he called me up, and that's when I came to Sitges. That's my whole life. Now you don't have to read the book. I mean, probably, you know. There's more in there, but still, that's pretty much it.
Hay mucho más, y bueno, y le quiero.
Well, there's a lot more, and I think we all want to ask you about The Sopranos. How did The Sopranos get to your life?
I worked with David before. My second year in television, I met him. You know, I had a year in television, so I had something to show. And he liked my writing, and he had a show, and he hired me on his show. And I worked with him over the years. He came to Northern Exposure at one point when Josh and John left. David took over and pretty much wrecked it, but that's another story. But so I knew him all those years, and we worked together. Actually, even after that, we would go to his house in Santa Monica, and we developed one show. I'd love to go back to it, but I don't speak with David anymore. But so when he did The Sopranos, we read all of the variations for network, for not network, and they were slightly different, but really the show was the show, and it was great. And then he got the money. He finally circled back to HBO, made the pilot. We were working at Party of Five, which was a really bad fit for us. They liked their show. We thought they wanted us to fix it, you know, and make it better. But they actually liked it the way it was, our bosses, so that it wasn't a great match. And David was waiting for Sopranos to be picked up because HBO had never done that. They were kind of dragging their heels. It was right before Christmas vacation, like that Friday or something. We're getting notes from our bosses on our script at Party of Five. The secretary, they were secretaries then, but the assistant opens the door and she says, there's a Tommy, because his name was Tommy, there's a Tommy Soprano on the phone for you. And at that point, we knew we were saved, right? And because he had called us at night, like 10:30 at night, and asked us if we'd come to and work on the show in New York. It was like, yeah. And so we knew we were saved, and we knew the show had been picked up. But the bosses who we were sitting with, we said, tell them we'll call them back. And they said, boy, you know somebody like that? Because they knew from the name Tommy Soprano, it was a gangster, you know. They were smart enough to know it wasn't an opera singer. And so, anyway, that was good that they knew. I guess there already was a Tommy Soprano in New Jersey or Michigan or somewhere, so we couldn't use that name. But Tony's better anyway. And then we went and did the show. We quit our lucrative job, and because HBO was kind of the elephant graveyard then in television, that our bosses were like, bye. You know, a guy tried to get out of a deal the next year and they wouldn't let him because they were, you know, they didn't want him to go to a successful show. But we got to go, and we went, and that first year we wrote them all, filmed them all, canned them all, and then before we showed them. So we just did it in a vacuum for a year. Actors, everyone, and it was so much fun. It was just so much fun.
Todos los guionistas se ocupaban.
All screenwriters were focusing on all characters, or each screenwriter had some specific characters?
I didn't understand that.
So you were a team of screenwriters. Did you take some specific characters, each of you?
No. It's a mistake to think that. No. No, I don't think so. No, I mean, some of the guys were better at the jokey stuff. I like the family stuff. But you had to be able to write it all, and also you had some control over your own individual episodes, so you could do it to your liking. And I like our episodes. Same with Northern Exposure. I was different in what I liked from Andy and Diane, who also worked on the show, but and I like our stuff better. I just like it. You know, that's what I like. I liked the family stuff.
Hablando de familia.
Now, speaking about family and mafia, when you were young, you were close to a mafia family, as you say in your book, and you also tell that your grandfather was smuggling alcohol. And were those influences for The Sopranos?
Yes. I mean, they came into play, certainly. I wrote, my first fiction in college was about Raymond Patriarca Jr. and his girlfriend, who I roomed with a little bit off campus. My boyfriend knew Raymond Patriarca Jr., and so we double dated. Raymond Patriarca Jr.'s father, Raymond Patriarca Sr., or Big George, I guess they called him. He lived in Providence and controlled the New England Mafia from Providence, not Boston. And so I was very aware of this. And this was before The Godfather. Did I say that already? It was before those books. But it had juice, you know what I mean? It was exotic to me. And also, you know, I got to meet his father, and I got to see the mother. They were comic characters. Although they were murderers, and you know, and stuff. But that did come into play. And then my grandfather was a bootlegger. I guess he did smuggle liquor illegally, but they were called bootleggers. It's somehow a nicer term, but it was during Prohibition, and that's what he did, you know. And he had a gun. He had the double-breasted suits. They smoked cigarettes in nightclubs. And I began to put together, and I asked my mother, "Hey, you know, was Grandpa?" And she said, "Yeah." That they would get the barrels in Whitford, Rhode Island, a small coastal town where they lived during this. And they did great. They made him a lot of money, and then Prohibition ended, and he opened a liquor store. But they lived upstairs, so I was very close. We used some of the incidents that my mother told me about on The Sopranos, because, it was a family show, and Tony brought his children in as beards, and we used some things that my mother had told me. But sure, everything that happens to you, well, anybody who's a writer knows, you just use it, so everything gets used.
Ya que dice eso,
now that you say that, in your book you speak about some visits, quick visits to therapists. So, is there something of your therapist in your character of Dr. Melfi?
Well, there was nobody in the room that hasn't been to a therapist, so we all knew, what it's like to sit there. One thing that's interesting, I don't know if everybody knows, but they made James's chair too small so that he would be bigger than it. There's that kind of manipulation going on. My brother is a neuroscientist, but he's also a psychiatrist. And so he prescribed, in the beginning especially, the medication for Tony. He'd tell us what she should prescribe and stuff. So in that way, my experience did come into it. But it was David pretty much. It was his invention to begin with, David Chase. And he really dictated that relationship, her behavior, all of that. James and Lorraine used to have so much fun playing together in those scenes, because you film one side, then you film the other side, and they do practical jokes on each other to crack each other up. So I got to see some of that silliness. It was fun.
La actriz que interpreta a la doctora...
The actress Lauren Bracco, she complained in the media that when her character was finished because of David Chase. And in your book, you tell that also when you left the series was because you had some kind of conflict with David Chase. Was it hard to accept that you could not finish the 6th season? Whether it was hard to accept that you could not finish the 6th season?
Again, it's like with Rolling Stone. I don't quit jobs. I get fired off them, But I'd had it. I wasn't around for Lorraine's demise, but I know that the idea, whatever that was, that shrink thing, he wasn't going to get redeemed, and it kind of ran out of juice. I think I can respect that as a practical or professional decision of David's, but with me, he just took a hate on me. He started hating me with a venom with which he had hated his mother. And we had been great friends, dinner friends, all kinds of things with family. But he got a hate on me, and probably with good reason. He described me as a negative presence, and I was at that point, because I was tired of it. I was tired of the mob stuff. It became more and more mobby. It was going that way. I didn't like... There's an instance where I was there Mitch was on the set a lot, so he was gone, my husband. So it left me in a room with Matt Weiner and David and me, and maybe sometimes Terry. And that was an instance, and I don't know if them being men is part of it, but they just annoyed the shit out of me. And I just didn't like the experience anymore. I didn't like David. I didn't like Matt. And so it was, 5 years is enough time to be on a show. For me, anyway, it's enough. It was enough and toxic. And he finally fired me. He fired me once, and Mitch said, he didn't want to fire Mitch, but he fired me. And Mitch, of course, said, just give us another chance. But we were gone. He wanted to get rid of me. And so I never watched after that.
¿No vio el resto de la serie?
So you didn't watch the rest of the series?
The last 6 episodes, 7 episodes.
¿Y sabe cómo termina la serie?
And do you know what's the ending of the series?
Last scene, because it made upset people so much.
¿Y usted qué sintió cuando vio la última secuencia?
What did you feel when you saw the last sequence of The Sopranos?
Typical David, it was very in your face, But I agreed with the feeling that I think it left the viewer with, which I had envisioned my own ending, and it had the same sort of gut feeling, which was anxiety. Is this when I get killed? Is this when I get arrested? And that's what that blackout left you with. So in a way, I can sort of see it. It was kind of smart-assy, but he was a real smart-ass, David, and really smart and really funny. I never really saw him after that, but he did telephone me 14 years later, one summer night. He phoned me. Do you know who this is? Well, yeah, of course I do. I spent all those years with you, and it was of no consequence. There was no. He wanted to tell me that he had read some stuff that I had written for the show that I'd worked on years ago for him, and how much he loved my writing. And he thought that when he told me I couldn't write The Sopranos, that wounded me. It didn't. I thought it was ridiculous. I'd worked there for 6 years, and some of my stuff won Emmy. It's just like, he didn't like the show that won us an Emmy, but that was his problem. It's when Malfi got raped. And he was right in a way. It wasn't Tony's show; it was her show. It didn't matter to me that he. It mattered to me that he called. And David, my husband said, "You've won a great victory here. Just don't be an asshole about it." That's what my husband said to me, because he knew that I would gloat, over the victory. But in the end, which fast approaches of life, I have fond feelings, and I'm sure he does too. So I think maybe not.
Bueno, creo que ese momento.
Well, I think this is the right time for a Q&A session to see if we have any questions from the audience.
Mientras vienen las preguntas, quiero agradecer a
So I'd like to thank the sign language interpreter for her great work. Thanks a lot. It's wonderful what you do.
Yes.
Preguntas. Una pregunta por allá.
Well, we have a question there.
Well, I will speak in Spanish. Soy un gran fan de...
Well, I'm a great fan of Northern Exposure. And there were some characters, very special characters, and they're the screenwriters. You said they have to adapt to the series. So how was it to adapt to those characters of Northern Exposure?
Which characters? All of them?
All of them, yeah. All of them.
Hello? Where's the... No, but where's the... No, but which characters?
Bien.
Particular, another characters were very eccentric in that show. In Northern Exposure.
I'm still not understanding the question. How is it to adapt to writing characters? That's
in that
the
series
job.
in particular, because I think it has a very particular sense of humor, that series.
Something about a sense of humor. I would say, look, I don't know if this is an answer to your question, but there's one, Tony had a mistress, Irina, and she once said to him, she was Russian, "I love my new pony boots, Tony." And I remember that line. It just gave me so much pleasure to be her and be in her head with pony boots on top of him, naked or whatever she was, So I think you were asking, like, is it weird to take on other characters? Yeah? No?
No sé si le puedes traducir un poco.
Sí, tú le estás preguntando cómo se adapta.
You're asking her how she adapts to the characters of Northern exposure, because it's very special characters.
Well, I'm not from Brooklyn, but I'm a type A Jew a little bit, so I can identify with Joel. I just love the characters, Holly and Shelley were so fresh to me, and that relationship, and Chris, writing for him. It's fun, it's play, period. I mean, that's really what it is. It's not anything that anyone couldn't do if they put their mind to it. You just have to go there in your head. Does that answer the question?
I think so.
It's an interesting question, because I feel like my answer gets at something which maybe I haven't expressed properly, but being Maurice, just experiencing those different, when characters are good, okay. We were lucky enough to have good taste, to take shows where, we wrote a pilot once where an executive said to us, it was such a good script, you didn't even have to keep going back to see who was talking, because each character had his own voice. You see, they were their own people, they were their own voice. And so when you are given that gift, which I was by David and by Josh and John, and we wrote a pilot that's in its 14th season, the show Blue Bloods, it's pretty good for what it is. It certainly is long-lived, God bless it, but once you get that voice in your head, you can't shut it up. You can't shut these people up, And, Mitch had the idea for Maurice to discover that he had a Korean son. That's when Mitch started working with me, and we got back together again, but that's a different subject, where stories come from, but he got in Maurice's head for that. What's the worst thing that could happen to Maurice, and the best thing? And so it had that kind of richness. It won the people that wrote it an Emmy because it was a good idea, but it was character-based. And the things that I really liked writing and that I get excited about clearly are character-based. So that's what your question kind of leads to. It's the best, right? Is that it? Okay. Phew. Good. That was fun.
Mi pregunta es muy fácil.
Well, my question is a simple one. Do you think in this time of Puritanism, a magazine like Rolling Stone that tried to change the world so that cultural journalism would be important again, or would we continue living an empty life?
Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to answer that. That's not a simple question. What I brought with me was, what everybody has a stack of, which is 6 New Yorkers. Because I'll get a lot from those 6 New Yorkers in my spare time. So I don't know if this answers your question, but I do miss journalism. I don't, I guess it's all online now. My friend was a sports writer for the New York Times. They got rid of that section. I worry about journalism. Do you? Are you a journalist?
No lo es, pero...
Well, I wish that journalists would change the world.
Periodismo ya no existe.
Well, I believe journalism doesn't exist anymore, and we'll never see a magazine where an article on a book or it can destroy the career of someone. So it is sad, and I think this is why we like to read these old books and these magazines of the past. But maybe in the future, do you think there's a possibility that we can create a good magazine, or we'll stay home just watching Netflix and reading stupid newspapers?
Beats me. What do you think?
Sorry, no mic. I cannot translate.
Y creo que la izquierda y la derecha.
I
didn't understand the part about magazine articles.
No.
People's lives.
I think that todo está corrompido, y si ahora mismo en este...
I believe that everything is corrupt now. All that matters is money and marketing. If there could be another magazine, a revolutionary magazine to change the life of people like Rolling Stone did, even later it became something else.
It'd be good. I don't know.
Gracias.
I'm very worried about the world. Don't get me started.
Nos da tiempo, gracias por la pregunta, nos da tiempo.
Well, we have time for one more question.
During the interview, we've heard some big names like Hunter Thompson or an actor you interviewed, and really big names. And I was wondering...
He's speaking English,
yes,
but it's not coming into my ears. Even more problematic. Do you understand?
Está con el canal de traducción. ¿Tú le puedes preguntar en español? Si
claro,
no,
claro, por supuesto.
I need someone to repeat it into my ear. See, I'm not just stupid, I'm double whammy,
No, mi pregunta es que...
Well, my question is, during the interview, we've heard many important names, very big names, like politicians, actors, or journalists that have worked with you. And my question is whether there is people that you have interviewed or with whom you have worked that you think they should have had a better career, that they are not as famous, but someone which is not as famous, but you think is a very good writer or journalist. Can you think of someone?
No. No, I mean, I was sent, I was never sent to interview the Stones. I always got like the kind of offbeat, like Black Sabbath, or just some kind of weird thing. So I never got, I did interview like Jack Nicholson once at a McGovern rally. McGovern was running for president and lost. And Jan was their winner, and he said, go talk to Jack Nicholson and ask him why he's ushering. So I went over to talk to Jack Nicholson. This was the most famous person I've ever interviewed. And I said, I'm from Rolling Stone, and I was a real fox too, so not a horrible thing to have to go up and have me come up and talk to you, but I work for Rolling Stone. Can you tell me why you decided to come out tonight it was a musical event, to be an usher for George McGovern? And Nicholson said, "Lady, give me a break, okay?" Do you understand? She understood. Lady. So that was my brush with fame. Oh, then though, Warren Beatty saw his opportunity. Rolling Stone, he's a big PR whore, and he grabbed me, and in front of an entire auditorium of people in Berkeley, it was a benefit, Chicago and Mama Cass and all that, and he grabbed me and bent my ear backstage and came on to me. Actually, it's like ludicrous because it was so in character. It was just silly, but that was a famous interview that never. He did well. I just don't know. I don't think I don't know any undiscovered. I really believe that if people write a good book, eventually or at some point, they'll be recognized, or even if they're not recognized, they'll find readers after they're dead. I have a friend who's an artist that probably won't be famous, but maybe after she's dead, what difference does it make if that's why you're doing it, Is that was that the answer? Is that a good answer? It's an answer,
Bueno.
You understand that I got in this morning and now I'm punchy. I thought I would. I did take a nice long nap, but I'm a little punchy. I don't know if you could tell.
Bueno, sea como sea, muchísimas gracias por venir. Bienvenida.
Well, thanks for coming to Madrid. Welcome to Madrid, and an applause for Robin Green. Well, thanks a lot, everyone. And as I said before, now in the hall we'll have Robin Green signing books for those of you who want to get the book. Thanks a lot.